honestly, because testers have an eye of finding out if things work or don't work. So I'm really happy to show it to you, and I really feel safe of showing it to you and getting your feedback on what you think and whether it makes sense or not. With that, let's get started. So I started in software development back around 2010. And one of the first pictures that was circulating that was pretty famous at the time, it's an older, this is a 2014, but back in 2010, there was a similar version of this picture is how do we all get to the same idea? How do developers, testers, product owners all get to talk to one another and then all come back and say, okay, what we really want to do is create the star. But what this picture doesn't show is that there is yet another level of abstraction. That to come to this understanding of saying that this is a star, still, it might be that we have language in the back of our heads that is different. So for all of us to use a common language and then come to the conclusion that this is a star, it's somehow an abstraction that we usually don't think about. Especially if we work in a one language environment. But as soon as you get somebody on your team that is from somewhere else, that they're not a native English speaker, that they're not the speaker of the language that you speak, this also becomes something to pay attention to. And this is something that is usually not depicted anywhere. And why this is interesting to me, I think Jenny kind of hinted to it. So I was born in Greece. As you can see, I also put my birthday there, not afraid to say it. And until 2005, I was living in Greece. So I was living in a very one language environment. I learned English and Spanish. English because my parents made me, and Spanish because I liked Mexican telenovelas. But my day-to-day activities were all in Greek. And I would only speak English if there was a tourist that would be roaming the streets and was lost. But besides that, my main language was Greek. Then in 2005, I moved to Spain. So in one go, I started speaking 3 languages because the community language was Spanish. On the other hand, I was enrolled in the program that was international. So the language of the program was English. So in one go, I'm going from 1 language to 3 languages. But because they were all languages I could command, let's say, this was a relatively painless experience. But in 2009, I moved to Germany. And there comes a new language, which I don't speak at all, and that is German. And that was also the first time that I started working in software development. So I'm in a new country, speaking a language I don't speak, working as Jenny said, I'm working at SAP, which is a German company, but it's an international company, and the official language is English. Nevertheless, all the interactions in the office, all the in-office communication is in German between the people, as one would expect. And so I'm not a linguist, but I find this topic interesting because I also see it with the people I work with, that we have a mixture of languages. I'm not going into culture at all. This is mostly about language. And again, with no authority on the topic, just some personal things I've noticed. So there are 3 areas that I see that were very relevant to me in the way language affected me. One is how I learn new things in every role that I get. I started as a tester, now I'm a product owner. But how do I get information to do my job? The second thing is that how can I help the users that I work with? And the third one is, of course, how do I work with the people I work with? How does this language barrier, or not only barrier, but also a language difference affects our relationships? What works and what doesn't? But let's see if this works now. Before I start going into all the details and so on, this is a very nice picture of rose galaxies. Now I have no clue about astronomy, but I like this picture. and I like other pictures similar to it. And the only reason we have such pictures is because of the Hubble telescope. Now, Hubble was a famous astronomer, very well known, made huge discoveries. Again, I'm not an astronomer aficionado. I don't know how these discoveries worked, but this was a professional, a good scientist with lots authority in what he knew and what he did. And one of the things that he's most famous for is that he proved that the universe is expanding. And this, let's say, is the beginning of the Big Bang theory. Because the universe expands, it means that it might have started from one single point. So universe expands, we have Hubble's law. Hubble published his results in 1929 in the, okay, I have to move this, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America. Now that's a very prominent publication. But there is a twist to this story. In 1927, 2 years before Hubble, Georges Lemaitre, I don't know how to pronounce this, published similar results that the universe is expanding. But unlike Hubble, he published in French in a, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, Société Scientifique de Bruxelles. So he published in French in the astronomers, presumably, or physicists society in Brussels. And Lemaitre was also not an unknown astronomer. He was also very well established in his field. He was also an authority as much as Hubble was. Nevertheless, Lemaitre's conclusions were kind of ignored or overseen until his results got published in 1931 in English. And then it started to stare that, oh, okay, we attribute these things to Hubble, but also Lemaitre came to it. When finally in 2018, the International Astronomical Union renamed Hubble's law to Hubble-Lemaitre law, just to recognize his contribution to this theory. And if there is anything that we can be taught by the story, is that the language in which you publish matters. So looking at all the resources that we have today to learn to do our work, maybe blogs, conferences, books, podcasts, code, social media. Many of them, if not most of them, are in English. I know that for someone like me, that I speak Greek, the main input I get is in English. Probably it's not the same for someone who's speaking German or Russian or Chinese or Spanish, that there's a bigger audience there. But with somebody with a language like Greek, our input is in English. So how we consume this input to learn to do our job better depends very much on the level of English we know. How we produce content of our own also depends on that. So I wouldn't be able to speak to you today if I could only speak Greek, or if my English were at a level that it would not be understood by you. So English plays a major role of how we can improve our careers. On the other hand, from the Lemaitre-Hubble story, what we learn is that there's material out there in different languages which could be more advanced than the one in English, or the main source of input that we get. So if you know someone who speaks a different language where you work, ask them where do they get their input. Is it the same that like you have? If you speak a foreign language yourself, try to figure out what other sources there are. Change your Google search to another language and see the results that come up. Opening up new sources in different languages might give us ideas that we were not aware before, but it might be very common for somebody else. Moving away from learning resources and going to how to help our users, and how does language come into play with that. So one of the things, regardless of what the role you're in, you're a developer, quality, product, whatever, one of the main things we all need to do is understand the user's problems. What what is the problem that the user has, and what can our software do to resolve that problem. Now imagine trying to understand your user's problem without being able to talk to them. When I first started working, as I said, I spoke no word of German. And I was doing the testing for a carpool service. Our users were all in Germany, but I could not talk to the users. I would not pick up any of the emails that they would write. The way that I got the input from the users was very, very filtered. So usually I got my input like this. Users would complain about something. They would open a ticket in German. Developers would write a developer ticket in English. And that's how I would get my input to say, okay, the users are complaining about this and that. So for me as a quality person, but regardless of the role, always I needed to get the information secondhand. And I was not able to go and speak to the users because I couldn't. What helped me a lot in this case was to note down words, specific words in our context that were being repeated again and again. So this was new vocabulary to me, but by learning it, I would learn a bit the context and start getting more and more into the user problems. Also, what helped a lot is that my coworkers, my teammates, let's say, would give me good descriptions in their back tickets. They would have the original text, a link to the original text, then what they noted down, and try to bring me to it. As time went by, things got better. Now I can actually talk to people. But in the beginning, until I felt, in the beginning there was nothing I could do, but the more and more I felt more comfortable with the knowledge of my German, the more and more I got into understanding better the customer's problems. Also, when I started talking to our users, it was kind of an effort from my side not to offend them, or let's say have misunderstandings with them. Because the way I used German was sometimes it was a direct translation either from Greek, either from English, which in German might end up worst case situation offensive. But even so, a bit of, let's say, it will not create a trust relationship between me and the customers. And for having people explain to you their problems, you need to have a bit of a, let's say, of one-to-one relationship, a bit of a more personal, if you want, relationship, to let them open up and say, this is my problem, this is what I want from you. And with the language not being, let's say, the best from my side, I had a impediment. Again, what helped was noting down the context and paying attention to their reactions. That would be more problematic nowadays remotely, but when I would meet them or hearing their voice, I could tell if what I'm saying actually comes across or not. And finally, it's very hard to understand your user problems if you don't know how the environment, how the business around what you're doing is actually working. For example, for a little carpool service, I was not able to find articles in German to say what the other carpool services are doing. What are their strong points? What are their weak points? How do they serve the users better than we did? What we could do to improve the way we serve the business? What does the German public want? I could not look for that information because I was not speaking German. And since our product was only in German, that was the market that we were interested in. And these were the people that we wanted to bring to our business. So without being able to know what they want or how they're already served, it was very hard to provide something in good quality and say, yes, but our product also does this or does this better. And again, all these things about understanding the user problems only got better after some time where my language skills improved and only with the help of my colleagues. And finally, coming to my colleagues, the work relations. One of the perks about speaking Greek is that you can pick up words in every language without not really trying very hard. For example, empathy, that is comes from the Greek word empathia. So I thought what it meant. I was talking to a colleague and he was telling me that we should show empathy to our users. And I looked at him and I said, okay, why? And he said, no, this is very important that we listen to our customers, we show empathy to them. And I could not understand what he meant because I thought I knew what empathy means in English. The thing is that empathy in English has to do with caring and compassion and getting yourself into somebody else's shoes. While in Greek, the word empathia means actually to have a grudge with somebody, to be very, very mean to them. So if we thought that we knew what we were talking about, that's what we thought, there was a very basic gap of understanding between us. And this was a funny situation with, let's say, zero effects, but it can be that there were other situations where there were misunderstandings, and that was sometimes very time consuming until I explained in my English what I meant. The other person explaining in their English what they meant. There was some time delay that in a one language environment could have been avoided. So it was very important that we break it down, that we explained in detail what we wanted to say to one another, so that we all came to this common understanding of what we wanted to do. Another situation that can be kind of awkward when you don't really speak the language, it's in social situations at lunch or having a coffee. It also very much depends on if you're an extrovert or an introvert. But imagine that you are in an environment where you hear conversations, you see people having a nice time, talking about the things, sometimes about work, sometimes it isn't about work. But what you actually hear is like you pick up words that are in your context, but there are things that you don't know what they are. So you have this question once you say, oh, they are talking about something unit tests, Jenkins and code reviews. So depending on how comfortable you are or your confidence levels, you might fill in the gaps with the worst case scenario. And because you have this fear of the unknown around you, you don't understand what is happening. Sometimes you bring yourself to think of the worst. And it's very, let's say, it's very disheartening to see people around you having a nice time, saying something that could be interesting to you, but not being able to understand what it is. You miss lots of context of what is happening in the office because you don't understand the conversations that are done, let's say, out of the office sphere. And once again, time, better understanding of the language, better knowing the people that you work with, so that you know the spirit in which they say the things they do, solves this kind of communication and barrier between us. And the last point that I would like to make about work relations is this kind of balance of who chose to talk to me and who I chose to talk to. So I know, for example, that I was left out of a workshop. I was not invited to a workshop because if I were invited, the whole thing would have to take place in English. I was the only one who could not speak German, so the whole thing would have to be in English. And I'm pretty sure that they didn't even do it consciously, but having me there would cause an inconvenience. So they left me out, and as I said, I don't think they even realized that they were doing it. They just did it because they thought, oh, then we have to do everything in English. And that would make more people uncomfortable. On the other hand, I found myself speaking more to colleagues that they would speak English to me rather than German. When my German got a bit better, I would always find the person that would speak English to me, that I wouldn't have to negotiate what language I spoke in. And that also created a bias in my side. I trusted the people that I could talk to, and they were the ones that were speaking English. On the other hand, they were people that didn't speak English to me, not because they wanted to show off their German or that they would only speak German, but because they didn't feel comfortable enough to speak in English. They were not used to changing their language set and speaking English to me. So it does create a kind of a bias in both directions of who you want to talk to and who wants to talk to you. And realizing this is saying, okay, this is the reason I don't want to have this meeting, or this is the reason I do want to have this meeting, helps a bit of setting your, let's say, your priorities straight. Say, no, I have to talk to this person, even if I have to practice my German. So that was something that took some time to realize. So what is the overview of this? That's for your learning resources. Check the people you work with, set your network, see if there is material in languages other than yours or the ones you're comfortable with that may be interesting to you. Have a look at it. Talk to see what other languages know of the topic you're interested in. When it comes to helping your users, start small, start understanding the context that you're working in. Start with small, start with words, continue with a bit of, let's say, business cases, small, and a bit bigger. Try to figure out how to help your users in the context you're in. And then about work relations, just try to notice what people are doing and how they react when a new language is involved. It might be that their behavior changes. Just pick up the signs somehow and see how you can facilitate the transition from one language maybe to multiple languages. So the question that comes is, would we be better off, all of us, if we just all spoke in the same language? On one hand, communication would be easier. We wouldn't have to translate anything. The other person would directly understand what we're talking about. On the other hand, if you are in a multilingual environment, you have to drill down to the details to have the other person really understand what you're talking about. And you have to really pay attention to understand what the other person is telling you. If you're in a one language environment, you have this common ground, you have this common knowledge, you have references that you can work on, that you can pick up, that nobody needs to explain to you. On a multilingual environment, you have different input. What comes in your team is very different because it's input from different languages, from different sources. Also, one language, these kinds of discomfort, should I invite somebody, who should I speak to? Do I need to choose these things? They are not an issue. You talk to anyone you want to with the level of language that you have. On the other hand, if you're in a multi-language environment, you have to be a bit more thoughtful. You have to say, okay, this person seems to not be able to communicate. Can I go talk to them? Can I bring them in? How can I make things a bit better for them? And if you are the person going in, saying these people are trying to include me, what can I do to improve myself? So it creates a bit of a different dynamic in the team. So the answer is we would be different. This is not a pros and cons list. Being in a one language or a multi-language environment has its pros and cons. It's not the silver bullet. You cannot say that one language is the best, multiple languages is the best. Just think that if we acknowledge the things that are happening and pay some attention to it, then we can remove the obstacles that get in our way and they have to do with language. And on the other hand, we can highlight the things that can make our team better. So thank you for your time. I'm not sure how much it was on time, but thank you.
You know, I have to say, it's been a while since I've had a talk that's literally given me chills. And this literally gave me chills. Thinking about some of my coworkers and how they must be thinking, how they must be reacting. This is incredible. I am incredibly proud of you as a person, and I am incredibly proud to be involved